Have you ever found hope in the most unexpected place? When Hurricane Isaiah struck Belshore, Emily Matthews wasn't just losing her new home. She was watching her chance at a fresh start wash away, until she spotted a determined German shepherd dragging supplies through flooded streets. What happens when you follow a dog into the unknown? Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from as we discover how sometimes it takes a storm to reveal what truly matters. Emily Matthews stared out the window of her newly purchased cottage, watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. The meteorologist on the radio spoke in grave tones about Hurricane Isaiah making landfall within hours. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and sighed, her hazel eyes reflecting the darkening sky. "Just my luck," she muttered, tightening the final screw on the plywood covering her kitchen window. 3 weeks in Belshore, and I get to experience the storm of the decade. At 42, Emily hadn't planned on starting over in a small Louisiana coastal town. Her life in Chicago, 15 years of marriage, a successful career as an art therapist, had unraveled with shocking speed after discovering her husband's affair with a colleague. The divorce papers were barely dry, and here she was, facing a hurricane alone. The cottage creaked ominously as the wind picked up. Emily double-checked her emergency supplies: bottled water, canned food, flashlights, batteries, and a small hand-crank radio. The previous owner had mentioned the house had weathered numerous storms since 1952, but that provided little comfort as the first heavy raindrops hammered against the roof. "Come on, Emily," she whispered to herself. "You survived Richard walking out. You can survive a little bad weather." But Hurricane Isaiah was far from a little bad weather. By nightfall, the storm had transformed into a monstrous beast, its howling winds clawing at the cottage. Emily huddled in the hallway, the safest spot according to the emergency pamphlet she'd been given when she registered her new driver's license. "Please hold," she pleaded, unsure if she was speaking to the house, herself, or some higher power. The walls shuddered. Something heavy crashed outside, followed by the distinctive sound of breaking glass. Emily flinched but stayed put, wrapping her arms around her knees. Hours passed in a terrifying blur. Sleep came in snatches between violent gusts that threatened to tear the roof away. When dawn finally broke, an eerie silence replaced the storm's fury. Emily cautiously emerged from her hallway sanctuary, muscles stiff, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Her living room window had shattered despite the plywood, allowing rain to soak her newly purchased couch. The ceiling leaked in 3 places, and mud had somehow forced its way under the front door. "Welcome to coastal living," she said with bitter humor, stepping onto her porch to survey the damage. Belshore looked like a war zone. Uprooted trees blocked roads, power lines dangled dangerously, and debris scattered across what had been manicured lawns just yesterday. In the distance, she could see neighbors emerging from their homes, faces mirroring her own shock. Emily had chosen Belshore for its quaint charm and close-knit community, aspects that had appealed to her wounded spirit. Now, that community lay broken around her, and the isolation she'd felt since her divorce intensified. She knew no one well enough to ask for help, and her family was 1,000 miles away. She spent the day clearing what debris she could and mopping up the water that had invaded her home. As dusk approached, Emily stood on her porch again, muscles aching, spirits low. The street remained flooded, the water reflecting the bruised purple sky. That's when she noticed movement, something large and dark struggling through the knee-deep water, dragging what appeared to be a heavy sack. Squinting, Emily realized it was a dog, a German shepherd, soaked to the skin, yet moving with determined purpose. "Hey there," she called softly, but the dog paid her no attention, continuing its laborious journey up the flooded street. Emily hesitated, then grabbed her flashlight. Something about the animal's focused determination sparked her curiosity, the first genuine interest she'd felt in anything since arriving in Belshore. "What are you up to, buddy?" she murmured, stepping off her porch into the floodwater. "And what's so important in that bag?" Little did Emily know that following this waterlogged shepherd would lead her not just through the flooded streets of Belshore, but toward healing she hadn't known she needed, and connections she'd stopped believing were possible. The floodwater was cold against Emily's calves as she waited after the German shepherd. Her sneakers were ruined, not that it mattered in the grand scheme of things. She kept a respectful distance, not wanting to startle the animal, who continued its purposeful journey without acknowledging her presence. "You certainly know where you're going," Emily said, her voice barely audible above the occasional distant crash of storm debris settling or falling. The dog was magnificent despite its bedraggled state. Powerful shoulders strained as it pulled the burlap sack through the water, its dark coat slick against muscular haunches. Occasional patches of tan coloring were visible on its legs and face. Most striking were its eyes, alert, intelligent, and utterly focused. Emily followed the animal through 3 blocks of devastation. Houses with missing roofs, overturned cars, and downed trees created an apocalyptic landscape. The water level gradually decreased as they moved towards slightly higher ground in the older part of town. Here, the homes were set farther back from the road, many built on sturdy foundations that elevated them several feet off the ground. Wisdom born from generations of Gulf Coast living. The dog approached a 2-story craftsman house with peeling blue paint and a wraparound porch. Unlike many neighboring homes, its roof appeared mostly intact, though several windows were shattered, and the porch railing had collapsed on one side. The dog dragged its burden up the porch steps with renewed determination, leaving Emily standing hesitantly at the bottom. "Hello," she called out. "Anybody home? Your dog is here." Silence followed, broken only by the sound of the shepherd pawing at the front door. Emily climbed the steps cautiously, uncertain of her welcome. Before she could knock, the door creaked open to reveal an elderly man leaning heavily on a wooden cane. "Cooper." The man's voice cracked with emotion. "Lord Almighty, you came back." The dog, Cooper, dropped his burden and pressed against the old man's legs, whining softly as the man's free hand sank into his fur. "I thought I'd lost you for good this time, boy," he murmured, then looked up, noticing Emily for the first time. Wariness immediately replaced joy in his weathered face. "Who are you?" "I'm Emily Matthews," she replied, suddenly feeling awkward. "I just moved to Oak Street. I saw your dog pulling that sack, and, well, I followed him. I hope that's okay." The man studied her for a long moment. He was tall despite his stooped posture, with thinning white hair and skin tanned and lined from decades of Louisiana sun. His faded blue eyes held a sharp intelligence that reminded Emily of the dog's focused gaze. "Leonard Thibodeau," he finally offered. "Most folks call me Mr. Leonard." He gestured vaguely toward the interior of the house. "Power's out, but I got some lemonade that's still cold. Might as well come in since you walked all this way." Emily stepped into a living room cluttered with memories. Photographs crowded every surface, well-worn furniture arranged for conversation rather than television viewing, and bookshelves sagging with paperbacks. A water stain spread across the ceiling in one corner, and a bucket collected steady drips. "You live here alone?" Emily asked, accepting a glass of lemonade from Mr. Leonard's shaking hands. "Just me and Cooper," he replied. "My Marion passed 6 years ago come November." He nodded toward a gilt-framed photograph on the mantel, showing a smiling woman with kind eyes. Cooper, meanwhile, had begun nosing open the burlap sack, revealing canned goods, packages of jerky, and a container of dog food. "What in the world?" Mr. Leonard knelt with difficulty to examine the items. "These are from my storm cellar out back." "How did you?" He looked at Cooper in amazement. Cooper sat, tongue lolling, appearing almost proud of his accomplishment. "The storm cellar door must have blown open," Mr. Leonard mused. "And this fool dog decided I needed supplies more than he needed shelter." His voice was gruff, but his eyes shimmered with moisture. "Why didn't you evacuate?" Emily asked gently. "Tried to," Mr. Leonard said, lowering himself into an armchair with a grimace. "My son was supposed to come get us yesterday morning, but Cooper bolted when the barometric pressure dropped. Wouldn't come no matter how I called. Been through too many storms to count, but something about this one spooked him bad." He sighed heavily. "Couldn't leave without him. He's all I got left of my daily life that matters." Emily felt a tightening in her chest. Here was a man who loved his dog so much he'd risk death rather than abandon him. "My phone's dead," Mr. Leonard continued. "Power's gone. No way to tell David I'm okay or find out if he's coming back." "I have a hand crank radio," Emily offered. "We could try to get information about relief efforts or evacuation points." Mr. Leonard nodded gratefully. "That'd be mighty helpful, Miss Matthews." "Emily, please." "Emily, then." He smiled for the first time, the expression transforming his face from stern to grandfatherly in an instant. Looks like you and Cooper both decided an old man needed looking after today. Cooper, as if understanding he was being discussed, moved between them and placed a paw on Emily's knee, his intelligent eyes studying her face. I think, Emily said, carefully placing her hand on the dog's broad head, that Cooper knows exactly what he's doing. The following morning arrived with tentative sunshine breaking through scattered clouds. Emily had spent the night on Mr. Leonard's living room sofa, unwilling to leave the elderly man alone without power or communication. Using her radio, they'd learned that emergency services were overwhelmed, focusing first on the hospital and nursing homes. Residential areas would have to wait. You really don't have to stay, Mr. Leonard insisted as Emily swept water from his kitchen floor. I've weathered plenty worse than this. Emily smiled, tying back her hair with a bandana she'd found in her pocket. I don't have anywhere else to be, and my house is in worse shape than yours. Besides, Cooper seems to want me here. As if on cue, the German shepherd trotted into the kitchen carrying a wrench in his mouth, dropping it at Emily's feet with a soft whine. Good Lord, Mr. Leonard chuckled. He's been doing that since daybreak, bringing tools from my shed. Smartest dog I've ever known, but he's outdoing himself today. Where did you get him? Emily asked, picking up the wrench and adding it to the growing collection of tools Cooper had delivered. Mr. Leonard lowered himself into a kitchen chair, wincing slightly as his knees protested. It was during Hurricane Elaine, back in 2017. Not nearly as bad as this monster, but bad enough. I found him trapped under debris near the marina. Just a pup. Couldn't have been more than 4 months old. His eyes grew distant with memory. No collar, no chip. Never found an owner. Marion had just passed that spring, and the house was so damn quiet. So you saved each other, Emily observed softly. Reckon we did. Mr. Leonard nodded. Now he thinks it's his turn to save me again. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Cooper immediately stood at attention, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Easy, boy, Mr. Leonard soothed, pushing himself up with his cane. Probably just neighbors checking in. Instead, when Emily opened the door, she found a tall man in his 40s wearing mud-splattered clothes and an expression of mingled relief and irritation. Dad, the man stepped forward, enveloping Mr. Leonard in a tight embrace before holding him at arm's length. Jesus Christ, I've been looking everywhere for you. Why didn't you evacuate? I called a dozen times. Phone died, Mr. Leonard said simply. And Cooper ran off. Couldn't leave without him. The man, clearly Mr. Leonard's son David, ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair in exasperation. We talked about this. After what happened during the flood last year, Cooper came back, Mr. Leonard interrupted, gesturing toward the dog who now stood attentively at his side. And I made a new friend. He nodded toward Emily, who had retreated to the kitchen doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder. David turned, noticing her for the first time. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. David Thibodeau. He extended his hand, his resemblance to his father evident in the same sharp blue eyes and tall frame, though his face lacked the deep weathering of his father's. Emily Matthews, she replied, shaking his hand. I just moved to Belshore a few weeks ago. I followed Cooper here yesterday when I saw him dragging supplies through the floodwater. David's eyebrows shot up. He was dragging supplies? Mr. Leonard explained Cooper's remarkable behavior, pride evident in his voice. David listened, his expression softening as he looked at the dog. Well, I'll be damned, he finally said, crouching to scratch Cooper behind the ears. You trying to put the rescue teams out of business, boy? Cooper's tail wagged enthusiastically at the attention. I came to bring you to Tyler's place in Baton Rouge, David continued, addressing his father. The power company says it could be up to 2 weeks before everything's restored here. Mr. Leonard's face hardened. I'm not leaving my house, David. Not for 2 weeks, not for 2 days. Dad, be reasonable. You can't stay here with no power, possibly no water soon. I've got a generator in the shed, Mr. Leonard countered. Just need to get it hooked up. Which I can help with, Emily offered, surprising herself with the words. Both men turned to look at her. I worked maintenance at a summer camp through college. I know my way around basic repairs and generators. That's very kind, David said carefully. But my father needs, what your father needs, Emily interrupted gently, is to be in his own home with his dog. After what they've both been through, separating them now seems unnecessarily traumatic. The silence that followed was broken only by Cooper's soft panting. David studied Emily with newfound interest, while Mr. Leonard's eyes shone with gratitude. "You planning to stay here too?" David finally asked. Emily hesitated. "My house took on water, and the window's broken. I need to get it secured, but after that, yes, I could stay, if that would help." She looked at Mr. Leonard. "If you want company, that is." "I'd be grateful," the older man said simply. David sighed, recognizing defeat. "Fine, but I'm helping get that generator running, and I'm bringing supplies before I head back." He fixed his father with a stern look. "And you're keeping your phone charged this time?" "Yes, sir," Mr. Leonard mock saluted, a hint of mischief in his expression. While David and Mr. Leonard worked on the generator, Emily returned to her cottage to gather clothes and assess the damage. The floodwaters had receded considerably, leaving behind a grimy waterline on walls and furniture. She packed a small suitcase and secured the broken window with a tarp and duct tape, a temporary fix at best. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking around the half-unpacked boxes and sparse furnishings. 3 weeks in Belshore, and there was nothing here that truly felt like home. Nothing she couldn't walk away from. "What are you doing, Emily?" she asked herself aloud. "Moving in with a stranger and his dog." But as she locked her front door, she realized it wasn't entirely altruistic. For the first time since her divorce, she felt needed, useful in a way that mattered. In Chicago, her absence had barely registered with Richard. Here, in this storm-ravaged town, she might actually make a difference to someone. She walked back toward Mr. Leonard's house, noticing how neighbors had already begun helping each other clear debris. Belshore was wounded but awakening, and somehow, Emily felt herself awakening too. 3 days after Hurricane Isaiah had torn through Belshore, a tentative rhythm emerged. Emily and Mr. Leonard established a routine of sorts, their days centered around recovery efforts. Mr. Leonard's generator provided enough power for essential appliances and a few lamps, making his home a small island of relative comfort in a sea of ongoing chaos. "You're putting those art therapy skills to good use," Mr. Leonard observed as Emily organized a community bulletin board outside the local grocery store, which had reopened with limited supplies. She'd created a system for neighbors to post needs and offers of help, matching resources with requirements. "How did you know I was an art therapist?" Emily asked, surprised. She didn't remember sharing that detail. Mr. Leonard's eyes twinkled. "You mentioned Chicago, divorce, and a career you loved. Did some deducing while you were sleeping. That, and you had your professional association card in your wallet when you asked me to grab your ID yesterday." Emily laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "You'd make a good detective, Mr. Leonard." "Retired high school history teacher," he corrected, leaning on his cane. 37 years of deciphering teenage handwriting and excuses. Makes you observant." Cooper sat attentively beside Mr. Leonard, his posture alert as he surveyed passing neighbors. His behavior had become increasingly protective toward both Mr. Leonard and Emily since the storm. He no longer dragged supplies, but he maintained vigilant patrols around the property perimeter and escorted them everywhere. "Ms. Matthews," a woman in a FEMA jacket approached them. "We're documenting damage for assistance claims. I understand you have a property on Oak Street." While Emily spoke with the FEMA representative, Cooper's ears suddenly perked up. He stood, his body tense, nose lifted to catch some scent or sound beyond human perception. "Cooper," Mr. Leonard called, but the German Shepherd had already bolted, racing down the street toward the older neighborhood where many homes had been built on the waterfront decades before stringent flood regulations. "Cooper," Mr. Leonard called again, more urgently. "Damn it, not again. I'll go after him," Emily said immediately. "You stay here." Without waiting for his response, Emily jogged after the dog, following him through streets still littered with debris. Cooper moved with purpose, occasionally looking back as if to ensure she was following. He led her to a modest ranch-style home where water still pooled in the yard. The front door hung askew on damaged hinges. Cooper barked sharply, pawing at the partially open door. "Hello," Emily called cautiously. "Anyone home?" "Animal control." She pushed the door wider, revealing a living room in disarray. Furniture overturned, watermarks staining the walls. A faint whimpering sound answered her. Cooper squeezed past her legs and disappeared down a hallway, barking insistently. Emily followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. In a back bedroom, she found Cooper standing beside a woman in her 70s, lying on a water-damaged mattress, her face pale with pain. "Oh my God!" Emily rushed forward. "Are you all right? What happened?" "Fell," the woman gasped, her southern accent thick with distress. "Yesterday, I think. Trying to save my photos when the water came in. Hip's broken, I'm sure of it. Can't move." Cooper whined, gently nosing the woman's hand. "I'm Emily Matthews," she said, pulling out her phone to call for help. "What's your name?" "Margaret Doucette," the woman replied weakly. "Everyone calls me Miss Maggie." "And how did you know she was here?" Emily asked Cooper softly as she dialed emergency services. The dog's only response was to lie down beside Miss Maggie, his warm body providing comfort while they waited. Emergency services were still stretched thin, but Miss Maggie's condition qualified as urgent. Within an hour, paramedics arrived to transport her to the field hospital set up at the high school. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she clutched Emily's hand. "That dog," she whispered, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "He saved my life. Leonard Thibodeau's dog, isn't it? Always knew he was special." "He is," Emily agreed, wondering how Cooper had known someone needed help, how he had detected Miss Maggie's distress from blocks away. When they returned to Mr. Leonard's house, they found David's truck in the driveway, along with a minivan Emily didn't recognize. Cooper bounded up the porch steps ahead of her, barking excitedly. Inside, the house hummed with life. David stood in the kitchen unpacking supplies, while a pretty woman with dark, curly hair arranged sandwiches on a platter. A teenage boy of about 15 sat cross-legged on the floor, rapidly texting on his phone, and an older girl who resembled her mother put plates on the dining table. "There you are," David exclaimed. "Dad was worried sick when Cooper ran off, and you followed." "We found Miss Maggie Doucette," Emily explained, describing the rescue. "She's been taken to the field hospital. She said her hip is broken." Mr. Leonard shook his head sadly. "Poor Maggie. Her husband Pierre passed last year. She's been alone ever since." "How did Cooper know?" Emily asked, still puzzled by the dog's behavior. Mr. Leonard smiled cryptically. "That dog's got a sixth sense about people in trouble. Always has. Just like his owner." The curly-haired woman interjected warmly, approaching Emily with an extended hand. "I'm Michelle, David's wife. These are our kids, Tyler and Abigail." She gestured toward the teenagers. Tyler glanced up briefly from his phone, offering a half-hearted wave, but Abigail came forward with a genuine smile. "Grandpa says you've been taking care of him," she said. "Thanks for that. He's too stubborn for his own good sometimes." "I heard that," Mr. Leonard grumbled good-naturedly. Cooper, meanwhile, had made a beeline for Tyler, pushing his nose under the boy's elbow until the teenager reluctantly put down his phone to scratch the dog's ears. "Hey, Coop," Tyler murmured, his cool facade cracking as the dog rolled onto his back, requesting a belly rub. "Yeah, I missed you too, buddy." Emily watched the family dynamics unfold, a bittersweet ache forming in her chest. This was what she'd hoped for with Richard. Children, grandchildren someday, a home filled with generations of shared history. Instead, her marriage had dissolved into acrimony and accusations, ending in a sterile lawyer's office with signatures on dotted lines. "Earth to Emily," Michelle's voice broke through her reverie. "Would you like a sandwich? You must be starving after your rescue mission." "Yes, thank you." Emily accepted a plate gratefully. "So, are you all staying in Baton Rouge?" "For now," David explained. "My work allows remote options, and the kids' school is offering virtual classes because of the hurricane. We're actually here to convince Dad to come stay with us, at least until utilities are restored." Mr. Leonard's face darkened. "I already told you, before you two start that argument again," Michelle interrupted firmly. "Maybe we should talk about practical solutions. Emily's been staying here, right? How's that working out?" "It's been fine," Emily said quickly. "Mr. Leonard's generator keeps the essentials running, and neighbors are checking in regularly. The water's receding, and cleanup crews are making progress." David and Michelle exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "What if," Michelle suggested carefully, "we brought Abigail's blow-up bed and some more supplies? Maybe Emily wouldn't mind continuing to stay, and we could come back on weekends to help with repairs." "I wouldn't mind at all," Emily said, surprised by how much she meant it. "See?" Mr. Leonard looked triumphantly at his son. "Problem solved." David sighed in resignation. Fine, but if conditions worsen, I'll drag him to Baton Rouge myself, Emily promised with a smile. As they ate, Tyler gradually emerged from his digital cocoon, drawn into conversation about Cooper's heroics. The transformation in the boy was remarkable, from sullen teenager to animated storyteller as he recounted past adventures with the German Shepherd. "Remember when he found that kid lost in the state park?" Tyler asked his grandfather excitedly. "The Rangers searched for hours, but Cooper tracked him down in like 20 minutes. "That's Cooper," Mr. Leonard nodded proudly. "Always finding what's lost." Emily caught his gaze across the table, a moment of understanding passing between them. Perhaps that was why Cooper had led her here in the first place, because she, too, had been lost in her way. A week after Hurricane Isaiah, Belshore showed the first real signs of recovery. Power had been restored to about half the town, including the main street businesses. Cleanup crews worked from dawn until dusk, and the constant drone of chainsaws filled the air as fallen trees were systematically removed. Emily's temporary arrangement at Mr. Leonard's house had evolved into something comfortable and oddly domestic. She'd retrieved more of her belongings from her cottage, which contractors were now repairing. The water damage had been extensive, requiring the removal of drywall and flooring. Another 2 weeks at least, the contractor had told her that morning during his inspection, probably 3 before it's properly habitable again. Emily found herself not minding the delay. Her days had taken on new purpose, helping Mr. Leonard with physical tasks he couldn't manage, organizing relief efforts at the community center, and exploring her new town through the lens of recovery rather than as an outsider. "You've done wonders with this place," Michelle commented as she helped Emily sort through donated clothing at the community center. David had kept his promise, bringing his family back to Belshore for the weekend to help with repairs. "It's nothing special," Emily demurred, folding a child's sweater carefully. "Just basic organization." Michelle gave her a knowing look. "Don't sell yourself short. Dad says the whole town's talking about that new art lady who followed Cooper home. You've become something of a local legend." Emily laughed, though a flush of pleasure warmed her cheeks. "Hardly a legend. Just in the right place at the right time, I guess. Or the wrong place at the right time, depending on how you look at hurricane season," Michelle grinned. She hesitated, then asked more seriously, "How long had you been in Belshore before the storm hit?" 3 weeks, Emily replied, her hands continuing their methodical folding. "Barely enough time to unpack my boxes." "And you came from Chicago? That's quite a change." Emily nodded, aware that Michelle was tactfully fishing for her story. The woman was kind but direct, a trait Emily appreciated after months of friends tiptoeing around her divorce. "My husband, ex-husband now, had an affair with a colleague," Emily said matter-of-factly. 15 years of marriage, and he threw it away for someone 10 years younger. Classic midlife crisis, I suppose. Michelle winced sympathetically. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Emily said, surprised to find she mostly meant it. "The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing how easily I was erased from his life. We had no children, and most of our friends were really his colleagues. It was like I'd spent 15 years being an accessory to his life rather than building my own." "So you came to Belshore to start over?" Emily nodded. "I had a great aunt who lived here years ago. I visited once as a child and remembered it being peaceful. When I was looking for someplace completely different from Chicago, it seemed, I don't know, fated somehow. And then a hurricane hit," Michelle observed wryly. "And then a hurricane hit," Emily agreed with a rueful smile. "And a German shepherd led me to your father-in-law's door. Dad says Cooper only brings the good ones home," Michelle said, her eyes twinkling. "He's got a perfect record so far." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David, Tyler, and Mr. Leonard, with Cooper trotting happily alongside them. They'd been helping clear debris from the park near the community center, and all 3 men were sweaty and dirt-streaked. "We found something you might be interested in, Emily," David announced, holding up a mud-caked metal box roughly the size of a shoebox. It was buried under where that big oak fell near the gazebo. "What is it?" Emily asked, intrigued. Mr. Leonard's eyes gleamed with excitement. "A time capsule, I'd wager. That oak was planted for Belshore's centennial in 1973. I remember they buried something beneath it during the ceremony." Emily carefully took the box, noting its substantial weight and corroded lock. "Can we open it?" "That's why we brought it to you," Tyler piped up. Grandpa says you'd know what to do with it, being an art person and all. Emily felt a flutter of professional interest, the first stirring of her old passion for cultural artifacts and their preservation. We should clean it carefully first, then see about that lock. It might be fragile after all this time. They gathered around a back table as Emily gently cleaned layers of mud from the box using soft cloths and water. Gradually, an engraved plaque emerged on its lid. Belshore Centennial, 1973 to 2073. To be opened on our bicentennial. Looks like we're jumping the gun by about 50 years, David observed. I think the hurricane gave us special dispensation, Mr. Leonard countered. Besides, half the people who put items in there are gone now. Seems a shame to leave their memories buried. The corroded lock yielded easily to David's screwdriver, the mechanism too damaged by moisture to put up much resistance. Emily lifted the lid carefully, revealing contents that had been partially protected by a layer of waxed paper. Inside lay a fascinating assortment of 1970s artifacts, a local newspaper, several photographs, a small vinyl record, handwritten letters sealed in plastic, and various small trinkets representing local businesses. Most remarkable was a journal with the town's history handwritten by the Historical Society president. This is amazing, Emily breathed, carefully lifting out the journal. A first-hand account of Belshore's development. Mr. Leonard peered over her shoulder as she delicately turned the pages. Marion Stevens wrote that. She was already in her 80s when I came to teach here. Sharp as a tack until the day she died. Emily read passages aloud, tracing Belshore's evolution from a tiny fishing village to the small but vibrant coastal town it had become. The journal described previous hurricanes, floods, and economic challenges, all overcome through community resilience. Listen to this, she said, her voice growing animated. Belshore has weathered many storms, both literal and figurative. Our strength lies not in our buildings, which can be rebuilt, but in our connections to one another, which withstand even the fiercest winds. Mr. Leonard nodded slowly. Wise woman Marion. As Emily continued exploring the time capsule's contents, Michelle watched her with growing interest. You know, she said thoughtfully, the Historical Society has been dormant for years. The last president moved to Florida, and no one stepped up to replace her. Emily looked up, catching Michelle's meaningful expression. Are you suggesting? Just thinking aloud, Michelle shrugged innocently. Someone with your background in art therapy and obvious interest in cultural preservation might be perfect for revitalizing it, especially with the town rebuilding. Seems like an ideal time to reconnect with our heritage. The idea took root in Emily's mind immediately, sprouting possibilities. A purpose beyond her own recovery. A way to contribute meaningfully to her new community. I'd need to learn more about Belshore's history, she said cautiously. Mr. Leonard chuckled. You're looking at a walking encyclopedia right here, young lady. 37 years teaching Belshore's children about their town's past. I'd be happy to fill in the gaps. And the time capsule could be your first exhibit, Tyler suggested, surprising everyone with his engagement. The teenager had been gradually warming to Emily throughout the day. You know, show how Belshore has changed since 1973. Maybe even add stuff from the hurricane, before and after pictures. Belshore, weathering the storms, David mused, could be a healing project for the whole community. Emily felt something unfamiliar expanding in her chest, a sense of possibility, of future plans taking shape. Chicago and her failed marriage seemed suddenly distant, relevant to her story, but no longer defining it. I think I'd like that, she said softly. Cooper, who had been watching the proceedings with attentive interest, moved to rest his head on Emily's knee, looking up at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. I think Cooper approves, Mr. Leonard said, his weathered hand gently scratching behind the shepherd's ears. And Cooper's got good instincts about what belongs where. Later that evening, after the family had returned to Baton Rouge and the house had grown quiet, Emily sat on the porch swing beside Mr. Leonard. Cooper lay at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to monitor distant sounds of the continuing cleanup. Thank you, Emily said simply. For what? Mr. Leonard asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. For letting me stay. For including me in your family. For everything, I guess. Mr. Leonard was silent for a moment, gently pushing the swing with one foot. You know, he finally said, when Marion died, I thought that was it for me. just waiting out my time alone. Then Cooper found me, and he brought a little life back. Now he's brought you, and suddenly there's purpose again." He looked at her directly. "So I should be thanking you." Emily felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't the bitter tears she'd cried during her divorce. These felt cleansing, renewing. "I think," she said carefully, "we might both be exactly where we need to be." Cooper thumped his tail in apparent agreement, and Belshore continued its quiet process of rebuilding around them. 2 weeks after Hurricane Isaiah, Emily stood in the doorway of her repaired cottage, surveying the fresh paint and new flooring with mixed emotions. The contractors had finished ahead of schedule, eager to move on to other jobs in the recovering town. "Well, that's that," she said to Cooper, who sat attentively beside her. The German shepherd had taken to accompanying her on daily errands, seemingly appointing himself as her protector whenever Mr. Leonard didn't require his presence. "It looks nice," came Mr. Leonard's voice from behind her. He leaned on his cane in the driveway, having insisted on walking with her to inspect the completed work. "Fresh start and all." Emily nodded, running her fingers along the new door frame. "It is nice." The insurance company was surprisingly cooperative. What she didn't say, couldn't quite articulate, was how empty the cottage felt. After 2 weeks in Mr. Leonard's home, surrounded by his lifetime of collected memories and the warmth of his family's weekend visits, returning to her sparse furnishings and half-unpacked boxes felt like a regression rather than a homecoming. "So," Mr. Leonard cleared his throat, "I suppose you'll be moving back in tonight?" "I suppose I should," Emily replied, unable to muster enthusiasm. That was the agreement. I'd stay until my place was habitable again. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by Cooper's soft whine as he looked from one human to the other. "Right," Mr. Leonard finally said, his voice gruff. "Well, you're welcome for dinner anytime. Cooper would miss you otherwise." "Just Cooper?" Emily asked with a small smile. Mr. Leonard's weathered face crinkled. "Maybe I'd notice your absence too, after getting used to having someone around who doesn't snore or shed all over my furniture." He glanced down at Cooper, who cocked his head innocently. Emily laughed, the tension broken. "How about I move my things back here tomorrow, but I cook dinner at your place tonight? A thank you for your hospitality." "That sounds fair," Mr. Leonard nodded, relief evident in his posture. "I'll even let you use my secret spice cabinet." "The honor is overwhelming," Emily teased, locking up the cottage. As they turned to walk back to Mr. Leonard's house, Cooper trotted ahead, occasionally looking back as if to ensure they were following. They were halfway down the block when Emily's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. "Emily Matthews," she answered. "Ms. Matthews? This is Janet Wilson from Belshore General. I'm calling about Margaret Doucette." Emily's stomach tightened. "Miss Maggie? Is she all right?" "She's stable," the nurse assured her. "Her hip surgery went well, but she's been asking for you and, quote, that miracle dog. She's quite insistent." Emily glanced at Mr. Leonard, who nodded encouragingly, having overheard the conversation. "We can come now," she told the nurse. "Is it okay to bring the dog?" There was a pause and muffled consultation on the other end. "Normally, no, but Dr. Reeves says he'll make an exception given the circumstances. Miss Doucette has been quite agitated, and they're hoping your visit might calm her." 30 minutes later, they arrived at Belshore General Hospital, a modest 2-story facility that had weathered the hurricane surprisingly well. Cooper, unusually subdued, walked perfectly at heel between Emily and Mr. Leonard as they approached the reception desk. "That's quite an animal," the receptionist remarked, eyeing Cooper with admiration. "Room 214, second floor. Dr. Reeves is expecting you." They found Miss Maggie propped up in bed, her thin frame seeming even smaller against the hospital linens. Her face brightened dramatically when she saw them. "There you are," she exclaimed, her Louisiana accent thick with emotion. "And you brought Cooper too. Come here, sweet boy." Cooper approached the bed cautiously, sniffing Miss Maggie's outstretched hand before gently resting his chin on the mattress beside her. The elderly woman stroked his head with trembling fingers. "The doctors say I'd have died if you hadn't found me," she told Emily frankly. "Dehydration, if not worse. That dog of Leonard's knew somehow. Came right to my bedroom, like he'd been there before. He's special that way," Mr. Leonard said proudly. A distinguished man in a white coat entered, introducing himself as Dr. Reeves. "I wanted to meet this remarkable dog I've been hearing about," he explained, nodding appreciatively at Cooper. We've had several patients mention being found by him after the hurricane. Emily and Mr. Leonard exchanged surprised glances. Several? Emily asked. Indeed. Mrs. Peters on Magnolia Drive. Cooper apparently led neighbors to check on her when her oxygen tank was running low. The Rodriguez family on River Road said he barked outside their damaged home until someone investigated and found their son trapped in a collapsed storage shed. He didn't bring me to those places, Emily said, puzzled. No, Dr. Reeves confirmed. According to the accounts, he seemed to recruit whoever was closest. Fascinating behavior. Cooper, seemingly uninterested in being the topic of conversation, remained focused on Miss Maggie, occasionally nudging her hand when she stopped petting him. The thing is, Miss Maggie said, her voice lowering confidentially, I never much liked dogs. Was always scared of them since I got bit as a child. But this one, she looked at Cooper with watery eyes. This one's different. Dr. Reeves checked Miss Maggie's chart. You're making excellent progress, Mrs. Doucette. Another week of recovery here. Then we're recommending a short stay in a rehabilitation facility until you're mobile enough to manage at home. Miss Maggie's face fell. My house is being repaired, Emily supplied quickly. I checked on it yesterday. The church volunteer group has cleared out the water damage and started rebuilding the damaged sections. That's kind, but it's not just the house, Miss Maggie sighed. It's living there alone. Pierre always handled everything. Since he passed, her voice trailed off. The room fell silent, weighted with an elderly woman's uncertain future. What about Belshire Gardens? Mr. Leonard suddenly suggested. Those new senior apartments they finished last spring? Independent living, but with services available. Miss Maggie brightened considerably, where Ruth and Estelle moved. I could do that. Wanted to when they first opened, but Pierre wouldn't hear of leaving our house. She looked wistful. Too many memories there anyway. Maybe it's time for a change. I could help you look into it, Emily offered. I'm heading up the Revitalized Historical Society now, and we're documenting hurricane recovery stories. I'd love to include yours, and I could assist with the apartment application while we're at it. The Historical Society? You. Miss Maggie clapped her hands delightedly. Perfect. I was treasurer for 17 years, you know. I've got records going back to the 1950s in my attic, if they survive the storm. We'll find out, Emily promised, already mentally adding Miss Maggie's archives to her growing project list. As they prepared to leave, Miss Maggie clasped Emily's hand. You know, they say God works in mysterious ways. Maybe that hurricane blew you to Belshire for a reason. Emily smiled, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. Maybe so. Outside in the hospital parking lot, Emily's phone chimed with a text message. She checked it, then froze, her expression shifting dramatically. What is it? Mr. Leonard asked, concern evident in his voice. It's... Emily swallowed hard. It's my ex-husband. He's in Belshire. Wants to meet for coffee. Mr. Leonard's bushy eyebrows shot up. Richard? Here? Why on earth? Says he's been trying to call for weeks. Worried after hearing about the hurricane on the news. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she stared at her phone. He's at the Riverside Cafe right now. Cooper, sensing her distress, pressed against her legs supportively. Well, Mr. Leonard said carefully. What do you want to do? Emily took a deep breath, considering the question. 3 weeks ago, before the hurricane, before Cooper led her to Mr. Leonard's door, she might have rushed to meet Richard, still hoping for reconciliation, still defining herself through his eyes. Now, with the weight of Cooper's solid presence against her leg and the memory of Miss Maggie's words about new beginnings, the answer seemed clearer. I think, she said slowly, I should hear what he has to say. Get closure properly. But I don't want to do it alone. Mr. Leonard nodded firmly. You won't be. Cooper and I will be right there with you. Actually, Emily said with growing confidence, I'd like you both to meet him. You've heard so much about Richard. Seems only fair you should see the real thing. Are you sure that's wise? Mr. Leonard asked gently. Emily looked down at Cooper, then back to Mr. Leonard, taking in his concerned expression and steady presence. I'm sure. The only way forward is through. Besides, she added with a hint of her newfound strength, I've weathered a hurricane since I saw him last. How hard can one coffee be? Cooper's tail wagged as if in agreement, and together, the unusual trio headed toward the Riverside Cafe, and another unexpected turn in the current of Emily's new life. The Riverside Cafe had reopened just days after the hurricane, becoming an informal hub for recovery workers, displaced residents, and volunteers. Its generator-powered espresso machine and Wi-Fi had made it an oasis of normalcy in a town still finding its footing. Emily spotted Richard immediately. He sat at a corner table, scrolling through his phone with the intense focus she remembered so well. He looked exactly the same. Expertly tailored shirt, expensive watch, meticulously groomed salt and pepper hair. In Chicago, his polished appearance had seemed sophisticated. Here in storm-ravaged Belshore, it struck her as oddly out of place. "That's him," Mr. Leonard murmured as they paused in the doorway. Emily nodded, a complex brew of emotions churning inside her. "That's Richard." Cooper pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. His presence steadied her, providing an anchor as memories threatened to pull her back into her old life. "We can still leave," Mr. Leonard offered. "You don't owe him anything." Emily squared her shoulders. "No, but I owe myself this. Closure." Richard looked up then, his eyes widening as he spotted Emily. He stood, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion as he registered her companions, an elderly man with a cane and a large German shepherd. "Emily," he said as they approached, his voice carrying that familiar note of controlled charm. "You look different." Emily was acutely aware of her practical clothing, minimal makeup, and hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a stark contrast to the carefully maintained appearance she'd cultivated during their marriage. "Hurricane recovery work isn't particularly glamorous," she replied evenly. "Richard, this is Leonard Thibodeau and his dog, Cooper. They've been kind enough to accompany me today." Richard extended his hand automatically, his lawyer's training overriding his evident surprise. "Richard Matthews. A pleasure to meet you both." "Thibodeau," Mr. Leonard replied, his handshake firm despite his age. "Can't say the same, considering what I know about you." Richard's professional smile faltered. Cooper, meanwhile, sniffed Richard thoroughly before sitting directly on Emily's feet, his posture alert but not hostile. "Shall we sit?" Emily suggested, defusing the moment. "You said you wanted to talk." They arranged themselves at the table, Richard visibly uncomfortable under Mr. Leonard's steady gaze and Cooper's unwavering attention. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," Richard began. "When I heard about the hurricane hitting this area, I was concerned. Your phone went straight to voicemail, and your email bounced back. Power was out," Emily replied simply. "Cell towers down. The usual aftermath of a Category 3 hurricane." Richard nodded, his expression softening into what Emily recognized as his courtroom sympathy face. "It looks like it hit hard. I'm glad you're safe. When I couldn't reach you, I decided to come check in person." "That's quite a trip from Chicago," Mr. Leonard observed neutrally. Richard shifted in his seat. "Well, I was already in New Orleans for a conference. It seemed like the responsible thing to do." "Responsible," Emily repeated, the word hanging between them like a challenge. "That's new." Richard winced, acknowledging the hit. "I deserve that. I handled things poorly between us, Emily. That's actually why I wanted to see you." A server approached their table. Darlene, a woman in her 50s whose catering business had been destroyed in the hurricane. Emily had helped her apply for FEMA assistance the previous week. "Hey there, Emily," Darlene greeted warmly. "Mr. Leonard, Cooper." She nodded to each before turning a more reserved expression to Richard. "What can I get y'all?" They ordered coffee, Darlene giving Emily's shoulder a supportive squeeze before departing. The small gesture wasn't lost on Richard, whose eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the interaction. "You seem to have made yourself at home here," he remarked. "I have," Emily agreed simply. "These good people have embraced Emily," Mr. Leonard added. "She's become quite essential to our recovery efforts." Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Emily, could we perhaps speak privately for a few minutes?" "No offense intended," he added, glancing at Mr. Leonard. Before Emily could respond, Cooper let out a low, rumbling growl, not aggressive, but clearly communicating disapproval. "I think that's a no," Mr. Leonard chuckled, scratching behind Cooper's ears. "Smart dog. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of my friends," Emily said firmly. The word friends felt inadequate for what Mr. Leonard and Cooper had become to her, but it would have to do. Richard sighed, his carefully constructed facade cracking slightly. "Fine. I came to tell you that Stephanie and I are no longer together. It ended about a month after you left Chicago. Emily blinked, absorbing this information. 2 months ago, this revelation might have affected her deeply. Vindication, perhaps, or even hope for reconciliation. Now, she was surprised to find it generated little more than mild curiosity. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and meant it. "That must have been difficult." "It was a mistake," Richard continued, clearly expecting more reaction. "The whole affair was a cliché midlife crisis, as you called it. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize what I threw away." He reached across the table for her hand. "I miss you, Emily." Cooper's growl deepened slightly. Emily gently extricated her hand from Richard's reach. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard?" He gestured vaguely. "Come back to Chicago. We can start over. I've kept the house. Your studio is exactly as you left it. Your clients have been asking about you. Our life is there." "Your life is there," Emily corrected gently. "Mine is here now." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "Here? In this flood-damaged town in the middle of nowhere?" "Emily, be reasonable. What could possibly be keeping you in a place like this?" Mr. Leonard bristled visibly, but Emily placed a calming hand on his arm. "Purpose," she said simply. "Connection. A sense of belonging I never felt in Chicago, even before things went wrong between us." "You've been here, what, a month?" "That's hardly enough time to—" "Sometimes," Emily interrupted, "it doesn't take long to recognize where you belong. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear away what doesn't matter and reveal what does." Richard shook his head, frustration evident in his tightening jaw. "This isn't like you, Emily. You're not thinking clearly." "Actually," she replied with growing confidence, "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Our marriage was over long before Stephanie. We both know that. You were building your career, and I was an accessory to your success. A suitable partner for firm dinners. Someone to renovate the house and make sure your shirts were properly pressed." "That's not fair," Richard protested. "I supported your career." "You tolerated it," Emily corrected. "There's a difference." Darlene returned with their coffees, sensing the tension and quickly retreating after setting down the mugs. "And what exactly do you plan to do here?" Richard pressed. "Waste your therapy background helping hurricane victims sort through their emotional baggage." The dismissive tone struck Emily like a physical blow. Mr. Leonard started to rise, anger flashing in his eyes, but Emily squeezed his arm gently. "Actually," she replied calmly, "I'm revitalizing the historical society, documenting the town's recovery, helping seniors like Miss Maggie relocate to safer housing, and considering opening a small art therapy practice focusing on community trauma recovery." She smiled, warming to her vision as she articulated it aloud. "And none of it feels like a waste." Richard stared at her, clearly struggling to reconcile this confident woman with the wife he remembered. "You've changed," he finally said. Emily nodded. "I have. The hurricane changed everyone here. But in my case, it was for the better." Cooper, who had maintained his protective position throughout the conversation, suddenly stood and pressed his nose against Emily's hand. She stroked his head absently. "This dog," Richard observed with a hint of his old analytical precision. "He seems unusually attached to you." "Cooper's special," Mr. Leonard explained, pride evident in his voice. "Became something of a local hero after the hurricane, finding people who needed help, bringing supplies. He led Emily to my door during the worst of the flooding." Richard raised an eyebrow. "A rescue dog?" "More like a rescuing dog," Emily corrected with a small smile. "He seems to know who needs finding." "And he found you," Richard concluded, a new understanding dawning in his expression as he looked between Emily, Mr. Leonard, and Cooper. "I see." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Emily sipped her coffee, feeling strangely peaceful despite the awkwardness. Richard had lost his power to upset her world. "Well," Richard finally said, reaching for his wallet and placing enough cash on the table to cover all their drinks and a generous tip, "I should get back to New Orleans. My flight leaves tomorrow morning." "Thank you for checking on me," Emily said sincerely. It was thoughtful. Richard stood, straightening his expensive jacket with an automatic gesture. "If you ever change your mind about Chicago, I won't," Emily said gently but firmly. "But thank you for the offer." Richard nodded, resignation replacing his earlier confidence. "You look good, Emily. Different, but good. Happy even." "I am," she realized aloud. "I really am." After a slightly awkward handshake with Mr. Leonard and a final, puzzled glance at Cooper, Richard walked out of the cafe, and Emily knew, out of her life for good. Well, Mr. Leonard said after a moment, that was something. Emily let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Yes, it was. You okay? Better than okay, Emily said, surprised to find it was true. I feel lighter somehow. Mr. Leonard smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Closure has a way of doing that. Cooper placed his head on Emily's lap, looking up at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. What do you think, Cooper? Emily asked, scratching behind his ears. Did I make the right choice? Cooper's enthusiastic tail thump against the floor was answer enough. As they left the cafe, Emily paused to look at her cottage across the street, then at the direction of Mr. Leonard's home several blocks away. A decision crystallized in her mind. You know, she said thoughtfully, I'm thinking I might not move back into the cottage just yet. Mr. Leonard raised a bushy eyebrow. No, Emily confirmed. I'm thinking I might rent it out instead. To Miss Maggie, perhaps, when she's recovered enough. It's single level, which would be easier for her hip, and I could check on her regularly. And where would you stay? Mr. Leonard asked, though his twinkling eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Emily smiled. Well, I know this cranky old history teacher with a spare room and a hero dog. If he's not sick of me yet, I thought I might impose a little longer. Mr. Leonard's weathered face broke into a grin. I reckon that could be arranged. Though I should warn you, Cooper snores something fierce. I think I can live with that. Emily laughed, feeling truly at home for the first time since the storm, or perhaps for the first time ever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first exhibition of the newly revitalized Belshore Historical Society. Emily's voice carried across the community center's main hall, which had been transformed for the evening's event. 6 weeks after Hurricane Isaiah, much of Belshore had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Power fully restored, debris cleared, and reconstruction well underway. The exhibition, titled Weathering the Storms, Belshore's Resilient Spirit, had become a focal point for community healing. Applause erupted from the gathered crowd of local residents. Emily caught Mr. Leonard's eye where he stood in the front row, Cooper sitting attentively at his side. The old teacher gave her an encouraging nod, pride evident in his expression. This exhibit represents not just our town's past, Emily continued, confidence growing as she spoke, but our present strength and future possibilities. The centerpiece is our hurricane time capsule, discovered when Isaiah uprooted the centennial oak. We've displayed its contents alongside photographs and stories from our recent recovery, showing how Belshore has always risen from adversity. She gestured toward the display cases arranged throughout the room, each carefully curated to showcase artifacts from different periods in the town's history, with special emphasis on previous natural disasters and subsequent rebuilding efforts. I want to thank everyone who contributed their stories, photographs, and heirlooms to this exhibition. Particular thanks go to Miss Maggie Doucette. Emily nodded toward the elderly woman seated in a wheelchair near the front, her hips still healing but her spirit undimmed, who generously opened her extensive archives to us. Miss Maggie beamed, giving a small wave to acknowledge the applause. And finally, Emily concluded, I'd like to recognize our hurricane heroes, the first responders, the neighbors who checked on neighbors, the volunteers who came from across the country, and... She paused, her eyes finding Cooper, one very special German shepherd who seemed to know exactly who needed finding. Cooper's ears perked up at this direct mention, drawing fond laughter from the crowd, many of whom had their own Cooper rescue stories to tell. As the formal presentation ended and guests began circulating among the exhibits, Emily was approached by Mayor Wilson, a compact woman in her 60s whose efficient handling of the crisis had earned her near-universal approval. You've done something remarkable here, Ms. Matthews, the mayor said, gesturing around the room. When Michelle Thibodeau suggested you might revive the Historical Society, I was hopeful but cautious. This exceeds all expectations. Thank you, Emily replied, warmth spreading through her chest at the praise. But I can't take all the credit. The whole community contributed. That's precisely what makes it special, Mayor Wilson insisted. You've created something that belongs to everyone, past, present, and future Belshore residents. Speaking of which, She lowered her voice conspiratorially. The town council has approved funding for a permanent exhibition space. The old library building on Magnolia Street. We're hoping to renovate it as a proper museum, with room for rotating exhibitions and community events. Emily's eyes widened. Really? That beautiful Victorian building? The very same. We'd like you to head the project. Official title would be Director of Cultural Heritage, with a modest but respectable salary attached. The mayor smiled at Emily's stunned expression. Think about it. No need to answer immediately. As Mayor Wilson moved away to greet other attendees, Emily found herself momentarily overwhelmed. From Chicago art therapist to small-town museum director in less than 3 months. Not the career path she had ever envisioned, but somehow perfectly right. You look like someone just offered you the moon, came Mr. Leonard's gruff voice beside her. Emily laughed, sharing the mayor's proposal in excited whispers. Can't say I'm surprised. Mr. Leonard nodded approvingly. Anyone with eyes can see you've found your calling here. It feels right, Emily admitted. Like everything that happened, even the hurricane, was leading me exactly where I needed to be. The evening progressed with a comfortable buzz of conversation as residents reconnected over shared memories and recent experiences. Cooper, wearing a special bandana declaring him Belshore's hero dog, accepted pats and treats with dignified tolerance, staying close to either Mr. Leonard or Emily throughout the event. Near the children's section of the exhibit, where local elementary students had created artwork depicting their hurricane experiences, Emily noticed Tyler engaged in animated conversation with a group of his peers. The teenager had come with his family for the weekend, and Emily was struck by how different he seemed from the sullen boy she'd first met. More confident, more connected to his surroundings. Ms. Matthews. Tyler waved her over. I was just telling my friends about Cooper and how he found all those people after the hurricane. He's become quite the legend, Emily agreed, smiling as Cooper trotted over to join them, drawn by the mention of his name. My theory, said a freckled boy of about Tyler's age, is that he can smell fear or something. Like, he knows when people are in trouble. Maybe, Tyler considered, scratching Cooper's ears. Grandpa says he's just got good instincts. Said he was the same way during Hurricane Elaine years ago. Always seemed to know where help was needed. As the teenagers debated canine superpowers, David and Michelle approached, arms linked comfortably. The exhibit is amazing, Emily, Michelle said warmly. You've captured something essential about this town. It's certainly generated interest, David added. Have you seen today's regional paper? There's a feature about Belshore's recovery, with special mention of the town's cultural renaissance spearheaded by recent transplant Emily Matthews. You're becoming something of a celebrity. Emily laughed, embarrassed by the attention. Hardly. I'm just good at organizing things and asking the right questions. Don't downplay it, Michelle insisted. You've helped this town process what happened through shared stories and artifacts. That's powerful healing work. Emily was saved from responding by the arrival of Abigail, David and Michelle's daughter, who had been volunteering at the refreshment table. Mom, Dad, have you seen the special exhibit in the back room? It's all about Cooper. Indeed, a small side room had been transformed into Cooper's Corner, featuring photographs of the German Shepherd during various rescue operations, eyewitness accounts of his heroism, and even a timeline of significant events in his life, from being rescued as a puppy during Hurricane Elaine to his post-Isaiah adventures. This wasn't in the program, Mr. Leonard said, raising an eyebrow at Emily as they all crowded into the room. It was supposed to be a surprise, Emily explained, suddenly nervous about his reaction. The children from the elementary school suggested it. They've apparently been writing stories about Super Cooper in their creative writing classes. Mr. Leonard blinked rapidly, emotion evident despite his attempt to maintain his usual gruff demeanor. Well, he managed after a moment. It's about time this old dog got the recognition he deserves. Cooper, standing in the center of attention, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. He sat regally, accepting admiration with characteristic dignity, occasionally glancing at Mr. Leonard as if to ensure his human was properly appreciating his moment of glory. As the evening wound down and the final guests departed, Emily found herself alone with Mr. Leonard and Cooper in the now quiet exhibition space. They walked slowly through the displays, turning off lights as they went. You know, Mr. Leonard said thoughtfully, when Cooper first brought you to my door, I thought you were just another storm refugee, someone passing through on their way to somewhere else." Emily smiled, remembering that rain-soaked day that seemed simultaneously recent and distant. "I thought the same thing about myself. And now look at you. Museum director, town historian, unofficial hurricane recovery coordinator." He gestured around the room. "Builder of bridges between past and future. And temporary housemate who still hasn't moved her boxes out of your spare room," Emily added wryly. "About that," Mr. Leonard said, his voice taking on an uncharacteristically hesitant tone. "I've been meaning to talk to you about your living situation." Emily's heart sank. Had she overstayed her welcome? The cottage was still being rented to Miss Maggie, who had fallen in love with the cozy space during her recovery. Emily had been so comfortable in Mr. Leonard's home that she'd postponed making alternative arrangements. "I understand," she began. "I should start looking for my own place." "Actually," Mr. Leonard interrupted, "I was thinking the opposite." He cleared his throat. "The house is too big for just me and Cooper. Has been since Marianne passed. I was rattling around in there like a penny in a jar until you came along." Emily held her breath, afraid to interpret his meaning. "What I'm trying to say," he continued, his weathered face earnest in the dimmed lighting, "is that I'd like you to consider making the arrangement permanent. Not as a guest, but as family. The house needs someone who'll care for it after I'm gone. And Cooper, well, Cooper chose you from the start, didn't he?" Emotion welled in Emily's throat. "Are you saying you want to adopt me?" she asked, half joking to mask her deep feelings. Mr. Leonard chuckled. "Something like that, I suppose. At my age, you start thinking about legacies. Who'll remember your stories, keep your traditions. My son has his own life in Baton Rouge. The grandkids visit, but they'll scatter to the winds soon enough." He patted Cooper's head absently. "I'd like to know my home, Marianne's home, will belong to someone who understands its heart." "I don't know what to say," Emily whispered, genuinely moved. "Say you'll think about it," Mr. Leonard replied gently. "No rush. But know that you have a permanent place here, not just in the house, but in what passes for my family these days." Cooper, as if to emphasize the point, pressed against Emily's legs in that now familiar gesture of solidarity. As they locked up the community center and walked through the quiet streets of Belshore, Emily felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The hurricane had destroyed homes and disrupted lives, but it had also cleared away barriers and revealed connections that might otherwise have remained hidden. "I don't need to think about it," she said as they reached Mr. Leonard's front porch. "I'd be honored to be part of your family, whatever form that takes." Mr. Leonard nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. That's settled then." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Marianne would have liked you, you know. She always said Cooper was an excellent judge of character." As they entered the house that had become her home, Emily reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here, from a broken marriage in Chicago to a hurricane-ravaged Louisiana town, guided by a remarkable German shepherd with an uncanny ability to find those who needed finding. Some might call it coincidence or circumstance. Emily, looking at Cooper's intelligent eyes in the soft lamplight, preferred to think of it as destiny. 3 months after Hurricane Isaiah transformed Belshore and Emily's life, autumn arrived with gentle breezes and glorious golden sunsets over the Gulf. The town had largely recovered its physical structures, homes rebuilt, businesses reopened, parks replanted with saplings to replace lost trees. The deeper healing, however, was still ongoing. Emily stood at the entrance of the newly renovated Victorian building on Magnolia Street, keys in hand, hardly believing the transformation. What had once been the town's original library, then a neglected storage facility, was now the Belshore Heritage Museum. Her museum, at least officially. "Are you just going to stand there staring? Or are we going in?" Mr. Leonard asked, amusement evident in his voice as he waited behind her with Cooper at his side. "I'm savoring the moment," Emily replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Do you realize this is the first time I've had keys to my very own museum?" "Well, technically it belongs to the town," Mr. Leonard pointed out, practical as always. "Don't ruin this for me." Emily laughed, finally turning the key in the lock and pushing open the heavy wooden door. The interior smelled of fresh paint and new carpeting. Gleaming hardwood floors stretched through the main exhibition hall, where display cases waited to be filled with artifacts from the Historical Society's collections. Large windows, meticulously restored to their original Victorian splendor, flooded the space with autumn sunlight. "It's perfect," Emily breathed, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "It'll do, Mr. Leonard agreed, his gruff tone belied by the pride in his eyes as he watched Emily survey her domain. Cooper trotted ahead of them, nose to the ground, methodically exploring each room as if performing a security sweep. The renovations had included a small office for Emily, a research room with access to digitized archives, and a community meeting space where she planned to host educational programs and therapy groups. Hard to believe this was all Mayor Wilson's idea, Emily mused, running her hand along a polished wooden banister. Mayor Wilson recognized an opportunity, Mr. Leonard corrected. But this, he gestured around the space. This vision is all yours, Emily. The sound of the front door opening interrupted their conversation. David and Tyler entered, carrying boxes of framed photographs and documents that had been temporarily stored at Mr. Leonard's house during the renovation. "First delivery for the new museum director," David announced cheerfully. "Where do you want these, boss?" Emily directed them to place the boxes in the main exhibition area, where she would begin installation the following day. The museum's grand opening was scheduled for the weekend, precisely 100 days after Hurricane Isaiah had made landfall. "The place looks amazing, Ms. Matthews," Tyler said, his teenage diffidence giving way to genuine enthusiasm. "Way better than when it was just a dusty old building we weren't allowed to enter." "I hope it'll be a place young people actually want to visit," Emily replied. "Not just a repository for old things, but a space where past and present connect meaningfully." "Speaking of connecting," David interjected, "Mom wanted me to remind you about dinner tonight. She's invited half the town to celebrate your official appointment." Emily groaned good-naturedly. "I told Michelle I didn't want to fuss." "You should know by now that telling Michelle not to make a fuss is like telling the tide not to come in," Mr. Leonard chuckled. "Besides, you deserve a celebration." As David and Tyler continued bringing in boxes, Cooper suddenly stopped his methodical exploration and stood alert, ears perked forward. Without warning, he trotted purposefully toward the door and out onto the street. "Cooper," Mr. Leonard called, concern immediately etching his features. Although the dog no longer disappeared as frequently as he had immediately after the hurricane, his occasional independent missions had become a recognized part of Belshore life. "I'll go see what he's up to," Emily volunteered, following the German shepherd outside. She found Cooper sitting patiently on the sidewalk beside a young woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. The woman had a camera around her neck and a notebook in hand, her expression a mixture of surprise and amusement as Cooper gazed up at her with expectant attention. "I'm sorry about that," Emily apologized, approaching them. "He's usually not so forward with strangers." "Oh, it's fine," the woman assured her with a warm smile. "I love dogs. Is this the famous Cooper I've been hearing about? The hurricane hero?" Emily's eyebrows rose. "Yes, this is Cooper. And you are?" "Vanessa Chambers, New Orleans Times-Picayune," the woman replied, extending her hand. "I'm doing a feature on small towns recovering from Hurricane Isaiah, with a focus on unique stories. Belshore kept coming up in my research, particularly mentions of a remarkable dog and a museum dedicated to storm resilience." Emily introduced herself, explaining her role as the new museum director. Cooper remained unusually attentive throughout the conversation, his focus on Vanessa unwavering in a way Emily had come to recognize. "Would you like a preview tour of the museum?" Emily offered. "We don't officially open until the weekend, but I'd be happy to show you around." "That would be wonderful," Vanessa agreed enthusiastically. "And perhaps you could tell me more about Cooper? His story seems particularly compelling." As they walked back toward the museum, Emily noticed something in Vanessa's gait, a slight hesitation, an almost imperceptible wince with certain steps. Cooper positioned himself precisely at the woman's left side, occasionally pressing gently against her leg when she appeared to falter. Inside, Emily introduced Vanessa to Mr. Leonard, who immediately launched into his favorite stories about Cooper's heroic exploits during and after the hurricane. Throughout the impromptu tour, Cooper remained unusually attached to Vanessa, behaving much as he had with Emily during her early days in Belshore. "He seems to have taken quite a shine to you," Mr. Leonard observed, watching Cooper's attentive behavior. "Animals usually do," Vanessa replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've always connected better with them than with most people. As the tour concluded and they returned to Emily's office to exchange contact information, Cooper placed himself directly in front of Vanessa, looking up at her with that penetrating gaze Emily had experienced herself. I think, Emily said carefully, Cooper senses something about you. Vanessa's professional composure wavered momentarily. What do you mean? He has a way of finding people who need something. Help, connection, purpose. Emily hesitated, then added gently. He led me to Mr. Leonard's door during the storm when I was lost in more ways than one. Vanessa looked down at Cooper, then back to Emily, indecision evident in her expression. That's an interesting theory. You're limping slightly, Mr. Leonard observed bluntly. Left side. And Cooper's been positioning himself as a support on that side consistently. Vanessa sighed, her professional facade cracking further. Car accident, 8 months ago. Shattered my left femur and hip. I'm fully recovered, according to my doctors, but it still aches, especially when the weather changes. She smiled ruefully, which in Louisiana is approximately every 15 minutes. Have you considered a service dog? Mr. Leonard asked, eyeing Cooper thoughtfully. Not that I'm offering this one, mind you. He's family. I've thought about it, Vanessa admitted. But my apartment in New Orleans doesn't allow pets, and my job keeps me traveling. She trailed off, looking around the museum space with newfound interest. Actually, that's part of why this assignment appealed to me. I've been considering a change, something less hectic, more community-focused. New Orleans is exciting, but sometimes I wonder if a smaller pond might suit me better. Emily and Mr. Leonard exchanged knowing glances. The Belshore Gazette is looking for an editor, Emily mentioned casually. The previous one retired after the hurricane. They've been making do with a part-timer from the next town over, but Mayor Wilson mentioned they're searching for someone with professional journalism experience. Really? Vanessa's interest was evident despite her attempt at nonchalance. Small town doesn't necessarily mean small stories, Mr. Leonard added. Isaiah taught us that, and Belshore's rebuilding narrative is just beginning. Cooper whined softly, pushing his nose against Vanessa's hand. Seems like Cooper's voting for you to consider it. Emily smiled. Vanessa laughed, the sound surprisingly free and genuine. Is this how you ended up staying? A persuasive dog and friendly locals making compelling arguments. Something like that, Emily acknowledged. Though in my case, it took a natural disaster and a divorce to clear my vision. Well, I've already experienced one of those, Vanessa said with surprising openness. The accident ended more than my marathon running days. My fiancé decided he hadn't signed up for months of rehabilitation and a partner with chronic pain. His loss, Mr. Leonard stated firmly. That's what I keep telling myself, Vanessa replied, her hand unconsciously dropping to Cooper's head. Anyway, I should get going. I have several other interviews scheduled today. As Emily walked Vanessa to her car, Cooper trotting alongside them, the journalist turned with a thoughtful expression. Would it be all right if I came back for the grand opening this weekend? For the article, of course. Of course, Emily nodded, recognizing the awakening interest in Vanessa's eyes, the same tentative hope she herself had felt in those early days after the hurricane. For the article. After Vanessa drove away, Emily returned to find Mr. Leonard watching her with amusement. That dog, he said, shaking his head fondly as Cooper resumed his inspection of the museum space. Always finding strays that need a home. She's hardly a stray, Emily protested. She has a successful career in New Orleans. Mr. Leonard hummed skeptically. And you had a successful career in Chicago. Look how that turned out. Emily couldn't argue with his observation. Instead, she turned her attention back to the museum preparations, but her thoughts kept returning to Vanessa's expression when Cooper had pressed against her injured side. Surprise, comfort, and something like recognition. That evening, Michelle's celebration dinner transformed Mr. Leonard's backyard into a festive gathering space. String lights hung from trees, tables overflowed with potluck contributions, and what seemed like half of Belshore turned out to congratulate Emily on her appointment. Cooper, wearing a bow-tie collar for the occasion, moved through the crowd with stately dignity, accepting treats and admiration with his customary grace. Emily watched him from across the yard, where she stood chatting with Mayor Wilson about upcoming town initiatives. He's quite the town mascot now, the mayor observed, following Emily's gaze. The elementary school wants to make him their official symbol, the Belshore Shepherds. Emily laughed. Mr. Leonard will be insufferably proud. Speaking of pride, Mayor Wilson continued, lowering her voice. The town council has unanimously approved your proposal for the Hurricane Isaiah Memorial Garden. Construction can begin next month. The memorial had been Emily's most personal project, a reflective space where residents could process their experiences while celebrating their resilience. The design incorporated a central sculpture representing community strength, surrounded by plants native to the Gulf Coast chosen for their ability to bend without breaking during storms. That's wonderful news, Emily said sincerely, especially the native planting approval. Those species are so important for coastal resilience. You've taught us all a great deal about honoring the past while preparing for the future, the mayor replied. Belshore is lucky to have found you. Or rather, lucky that Cooper found you. As the evening progressed, Emily found herself drawn into conversation after conversation with townspeople who now felt like extended family. Miss Maggie, moving slowly but steadily with her cane, spoke excitedly about her plans to volunteer at the museum once her hip had fully healed. Darlene from the cafe described her idea for a cookbook featuring hurricane recipes, meals that could be prepared with limited resources during power outages. Every interaction reinforced what Emily had gradually come to understand. Belshore wasn't just where she lived now. It was where she belonged. The hurricane, for all its destruction, had cleared away the debris of her old life, making space for something more authentic to take root and grow. Later, as the party wound down and guests departed, Emily sat on the porch swing beside Mr. Leonard. Cooper lay at their feet, exhausted from his duties as guest of honor. "Good night," Mr. Leonard asked, his voice soft in the evening quiet. "Perfect," Emily replied truthfully. "Though I still think Michelle went overboard." "That's her way of showing love," he chuckled. "Always has been." They swung in companionable silence, listening to the distant sound of waves against the shore, a sound that had once frightened Emily during the hurricane, but now provided rhythmic comfort. "You know," Mr. Leonard said eventually, "when Marion died, I thought my story was ending. Just a matter of turning the final pages." He gazed out into the darkness, memory softening his features. "Never expected a whole new chapter to begin at my age." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder briefly, a gesture of affection that had become natural between them. "I'm glad it did." "Me too," he agreed simply. "Cooper too, I expect, though he's not saying." As if hearing his name, Cooper looked up, his intelligent eyes reflecting the porch light. In that moment, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude for this unlikely family unit they had formed. An elderly teacher, a displaced art therapist, and a German shepherd with an uncanny ability to find those who needed finding. The hurricane's waters had receded months ago, but the healing they had brought continued to flow through Belshore and through Emily's once wounded heart. "Are you sure you don't want help with that?" Emily called from the porch, watching Mr. Leonard struggle to hang a string of lights along the garden path. 6 months to the day after Hurricane Isaiah had transformed their lives, they were preparing for a different kind of celebration. "I'm 82, not infirm," Mr. Leonard grumbled, though his tone held no real irritation. "Been decorating this yard for Christmas longer than you've been alive." Emily smiled, knowing better than to insist. Mr. Leonard's stubborn independence was as much a part of him as his encyclopedic knowledge of local history or his devoted care for Cooper. "Speaking of whom, where's Cooper?" she asked, scanning the yard for the German shepherd who usually supervised Mr. Leonard's outdoor activities with vigilant attention. "Went with Vanessa to pick up the cake, Mr. Leonard replied, securing the last section of lights with surprising dexterity for hands marked by age spots and arthritis. That dog's developed quite the sweet tooth in his old age. As if summoned by the mention of treats, Cooper came trotting around the corner of the house, followed by Vanessa carrying a large bakery box. In the 3 months since she'd moved to Belshore to take the position at the Gazette, Vanessa had become a frequent presence in their household, initially for interviews about the museum and Emily's work, then as a friend, and gradually as something more significant. Cooper greeted Emily with his customary gentle nudge, then immediately returned to Vanessa's side, positioning himself carefully on her left as he always did when her injured hip was bothering her. "Weather front moving in," Vanessa explained, noticing Emily's concerned glance. Cooper's been extra attentive all morning. It's like living with a barometric pressure gauge that sheds. At least he's consistent. Emily laughed, taking the cake box. How's the special edition coming along? Vanessa's eyes lit up with professional pride. Just send it to print. Belshore Rising, 6 months after Isaiah, will hit newsstands tomorrow morning. I've included a special feature on the museum exhibition and all 10 of the oral histories you've collected. The Heritage Museum had exceeded all expectations, becoming not just a repository for artifacts, but a community healing space. Emily's Oral History Project, recording residents' hurricane experiences and recovery journeys, had attracted attention from universities studying disaster resilience in coastal communities. Miss Maggie will be thrilled to see her story in print, Emily said. She's been telling everyone at Belshore Gardens about her interview. Inside the house, preparations for the evening's gathering continued. Michelle bustled about the kitchen, directing Abigail and Tyler in the arrangement of appetizers. David sat at the dining table with Miss Maggie, who had become a regular visitor despite having moved into the senior living community. They were sorting through a box of old photographs, selecting images for a new museum exhibition on Belshore's holiday traditions. The whole family's here, Vanessa observed quietly, helping Emily arrange desserts on a serving tray. Almost, Emily agreed. Mayor Wilson and her husband are coming later, and Darlene from the cafe should be here any minute with the hot cider. You know what I mean, Vanessa said, her voice gentle. Your family, the one you found here. Emily paused, taking in the scene around her. Mr. Leonard now supervising Tyler's arrangement of firewood for later, Michelle and Abigail laughing over some shared joke. David and Miss Maggie engaged in animated conversation about a vintage photograph. Cooper, meanwhile, had stationed himself in the center of the activity, his watchful gaze taking in every detail as if cataloging the joy unfolding in his domain. Yes, Emily acknowledged, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. My family. The evening gathering was ostensibly to mark 6 months of recovery since the hurricane, but it had evolved into something more personal, a celebration of connections forged and strengthened through adversity. As additional guests arrived, neighbors, museum volunteers, friends from the community center, the house filled with conversation and laughter. After dinner, as everyone moved to the backyard where Mr. Leonard's lights created a magical ambience against the early evening darkness, Emily found herself momentarily alone in the kitchen. She was rinsing dessert plates when a soft whine alerted her to Cooper's presence. "What is it, buddy?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. Cooper nudged her gently toward the window, where she could see Mr. Leonard standing alone at the far end of the yard, gazing out toward where the Gulf waters would be visible in daylight. "Checking on Dad, are we?" Emily smiled, recognizing Cooper's protective instincts at work. "All right, I'm going." She found Mr. Leonard lost in thought, his weathered face illuminated by the string lights. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "Just remembering," he replied, his voice reflective rather than sad. Marian loved gatherings like this. Said a house wasn't really a home until it had hosted enough people to wear down the welcome mat. Emily smiled, having heard many such Marianne wisdoms over the months. "She sounds wonderful." She was, Mr. Leonard nodded. "Would have approved of how things have turned out, I think. Especially Cooper's matchmaking tendencies." Emily followed his gaze to where Vanessa was now sitting with Miss Maggie, the two women clearly enjoying each other's company despite their age difference. "Cooper does have a knack for bringing the right people together. Speaking of which," Mr. Leonard said, reaching into his pocket, "I've been meaning to give you something." He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in Emily's palm. When she opened it, a key slid out, old-fashioned and ornate, clearly not belonging to any modern lock. "What's this?" she asked, turning it over in her hand. "It was Marianne's grandmother's," Mr. Leonard explained. "Belonged to the family's first home in Belshore, built in 1891. The house is long gone, but the key has been passed down as a symbol of belonging." He cleared his throat, emotion momentarily thickening his voice. "Marianne wanted our daughter to have it someday, but since we were never blessed with a girl of our own, well, I think she'd want you to have it now." Emily stared at the key, tears welling in her eyes. "Leonard, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. Just wanted you to have a tangible reminder that you belong here. That this is your home now, not just someplace a storm blew you to. Emily wrapped her arms around the old teacher, the key clutched tightly in her hand. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. Their moment was interrupted by excited calls from the patio. Emily, Mr. Leonard, come quick. They hurried back to find everyone gathered around Cooper, who sat with unusual stillness, his attention focused on something in the garden beyond the light's reach. What is it? Emily asked, joining the curious circle. Look, Tyler whispered, pointing into the darkness. By the old oak stump. As her eyes adjusted, Emily made out several small shapes moving cautiously at the garden's edge, a mother cat with 3 kittens, barely visible in the dim light. Cooper watched them with alert interest but remained perfectly stationary, as if understanding that any movement might frighten them away. They've been sheltering under the garden shed, David explained quietly. Tyler spotted them yesterday, but they ran when he approached. They're half-starved, poor things, Michelle added. We left food, but they're too scared to come near the house. Cooper turned his head toward Mr. Leonard, then back to the cats, his intention as clear as if he'd spoken aloud. Now hold on, Mr. Leonard protested, recognizing that look. We are not adopting 4 cats. The house is full enough as it is. Actually, Vanessa interjected, a soft smile playing on her lips. I've been thinking about getting a pet for my apartment. Doctor's orders, animal therapy for ongoing pain management. 1 down, 3 to go. Abigail grinned, already captivated by the kittens. Miss Maggie mentioned Belshire Gardens allows small pets. Emily suggested innocently. Something about emotional support animals improving seniors' quality of life. 2 down, 2 to go. Tyler counted, barely containing his excitement. Mom, Dad, our backyard in Baton Rouge is pretty big. The negotiation continued in hushed tones, plans forming to gradually coax the feline family into safety and eventual adoption. Throughout the discussion, Cooper remained their silent sentinel, his calm presence somehow communicating to the wary mother cat that no harm would come to her or her kittens. That dog, Mr. Leonard sighed, shaking his head in resignation. Always bringing home strays. It's his superpower, Emily replied softly, her hand finding Mr. Leonard's in the darkness. Finding what's lost and bringing it where it belongs. As the evening progressed and the gathering gradually dispersed, the mother cat and her kittens remained at the garden's edge, gradually moving closer to the food Michelle had carefully placed for them. Cooper maintained his watchful distance, occasionally glancing back at the humans as if to ensure they were properly appreciating his latest rescue operation. Later, after the last guests had departed and the house had quieted, Emily stood on the front porch watching a gentle rain begin to fall. The storm that had been threatening all day had finally arrived, but without the destructive force of Hurricane Isaiah. This was a nurturing rain, the kind that renewed rather than destroyed. She felt rather than heard Mr. Leonard join her, Cooper padding silently between them. Full circle, the old teacher observed, nodding toward the front yard where puddles were beginning to form. Water brought you here, and water continues to shape our story. But a different kind of water, Emily noted. Healing rather than hurting. That's the way of things, Mr. Leonard replied philosophically. Same element, different purpose depending on when and how it comes into our lives. Cooper moved to the porch steps, looking out into the rain with alert interest, his posture suggesting he might venture out despite the weather. Stay, Cooper, Mr. Leonard called gently. Everyone who needs finding has been found for tonight. As if understanding, the German shepherd settled at their feet, content to remain within the circle of light and warmth that defined home. Emily fingered the antique key in her pocket, understanding it represented not just physical space, but emotional belonging. 6 months ago, she had followed a determined dog through flood-ravaged streets, having no idea he was leading her not just to shelter, but to healing, purpose, and family. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, if Cooper somehow knew? If he could sense not just who needed help, but who belonged together? Mr. Leonard considered this, watching the dog who had changed both their lives. I think, he said slowly, that Cooper understands more about human hearts than we give him credit for. Maybe he doesn't know in the way we know things, but he feels what's broken and what might help mend it. As if affirming this assessment, Cooper sighed contentedly, his warm weight against Emily's ankles a tactile reminder of the unexpected connections that had rebuilt her world after the storm. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not threatening but reassuring, a reminder that storms come and go, but what they reveal about human resilience and connection remains long after the waters recede. "We should go in," Mr. Leonard suggested as the rain intensified. "Tomorrow promises to be busy. The museum, the newspaper special edition, and Mayor Wilson mentioned something about a spring festival committee needing your expertise." Emily smiled, turning toward the warm light of the home they now undeniably shared. "Lead the way," she said, as Cooper rose to accompany them inside. "Both of you." As the door closed behind them, the storm continued its gentle percussion on the roof. No longer a sound of destruction, but a lullaby of renewal, a reminder that sometimes it takes a tempest to clear the path toward home. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched all the way through," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.